The year was 2147, and humanity found itself fighting the most perilous battle in its history. The Tsark, a merciless alien race, had launched an all-out war against the Terran Alliance, a vast human empire spread across the stars. The Tsark were unlike any enemy humanity had faced before, fierce, technologically advanced, and relentless in their pursuit of conquest. Every move the Tsark made seemed calculated, their attacks swift and devastating. In the span of just a few short years, they had destroyed human colonies, wiped out entire fleets, and cornered Earth itself, the last stronghold of humanity. The once proud Terran Alliance now stood on the edge of collapse, its forces scattered, exhausted and outgunned. The Tsark had taken everything. Their relentless invasion left little to fight for. Hope was fading fast, and the fate of humanity hung by a thin thread. General Cassandra Hayes stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, Earth's last defense fleet. She gazed out at the vast expanse of space, watching the looming shadow of the Tsark, warships closing in. They were massive, their engines glowing with an eerie red light as they steadily surrounded Earth. Their numbers were overwhelming, their power unmatched. Every possible escape route had been sealed. The human fleet was outnumbered and outclassed. The Tsark were getting closer, and the inevitable seemed near. As she watched the horizon darken with the Tsark armada, a heavy silence settled in her chest. There was no backup. There was no more reinforcements. Earth was alone. Then, just as the atmosphere in the command room grew thick with the weight of impending defeat, something strange happened. The ship's sensors blared to life with an unexpected signal, a faint broken transmission that cut through the noise of the approaching enemy. It wasn't a normal message. In fact, it shouldn't have even been there. It came from deep within Earth's forgotten history, a signal that had been lost for centuries. It was old, very old. "General, you need to see this," said Lieutenant Rourke, her voice quivering in disbelief as the data streamed across the display screens. General Hayes quickly approached, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the mysterious signal. It was encoded, but the source was unmistakable. It came from a program humanity had abandoned long ago, the Legion. She had heard whispers of it, stories passed down by the old soldiers, but no one had seen or heard of it for decades. The Legion was supposed to be nothing more than a myth, a failed project from an era of desperation. The Legion had been a secret military program, one developed long before the war with the Tsark had even begun. It was said to consist of the most dangerous soldiers humanity had ever created, individuals enhanced to be far beyond ordinary soldiers. They were part human, part machine, genetically altered, with technology integrated directly into their bodies. The program had been abandoned, though, as the threat of alien invasion seemed distant. Those who had worked on it disappeared, and all traces of the Legion had been wiped clean from the records. No one even knew if any of the soldiers had survived, let alone if they could still be activated. But here it was, a signal from that long-forgotten program, cutting through the darkness of space, a beacon of something that had once been humanity's ultimate weapon. General Hayes's heart raced. The signal wasn't just a beacon, it was a cry for help. Someone, or something, had activated the Legion, and they were out there. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Earth had no chance left, but perhaps, just perhaps, this ancient program held the key to turning the tide. Without hesitation, General Hayes issued the order. A team was dispatched to trace the signal's source. As they prepared to move, uncertainty gripped her heart. What were they about to uncover? Were the Legionnaires still alive? And if they were, would they be able to help in time? The fate of Earth depended on this answer. The team descended into the depths of Earth's surface, to a long-forgotten underground facility, one that had been abandoned for decades. As they reached the sealed chambers, the air grew thick with dust and the weight of history. But there was no time to hesitate. With one final command, the chamber doors opened. The Legionnaires would soon awaken, and the question that remained was whether humanity had enough time to harness their unimaginable power. Outside, the enemy was closing in. Every moment mattered. Earth's most dangerous soldiers had been summoned from the shadows of the past, and the final battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. Would these ancient warriors rise to the challenge, or had humanity's last hope been buried long ago, lost to time? Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a forgotten underground facility that had been sealed off for decades, a secret force lay, dormant, hidden from the world, away from the prying eyes of the enemy, and even from the highest ranks of the Terran Alliance's military. The Legion had remained untouched since its creation. This facility, once a marvel of human engineering, was now a silent monument to a project humanity had abandoned in the face of a war they never imagined could happen. But the project wasn't just abandoned, it was buried. The Legion was not an ordinary military force. It was the culmination of humanity's most ambitious and dangerous experiment, the brainchild of a desperate few who believed that only by pushing the boundaries of science and ethics could mankind hope to survive. The Legionnaires were not mere soldiers. They were enhanced warriors, modified with technology that was decades ahead of anything humanity had ever dreamed of. The enhancements they had received went beyond just physical strength and speed. They had been genetically altered, their bodies reinforced with advanced cybernetics, creating beings that were more machine than human. They were living weapons, designed to perform impossible feats, trained in every form of combat, and programmed to survive in conditions that would break even the most skilled soldiers. These warriors had been intended for a war that never came, a secret force held in reserve for humanity's darkest hour. That hour had now arrived. General Cassandra Hayes knew the situation was hopeless. The Tsark fleet had them surrounded. Their attacks had decimated humanity's forces, and Earth was on the brink of total destruction. Desperation clawed at her chest as she watched the enemy armada approach. There was no time to waste. With a heavy heart, she made the decision that would change everything. She ordered a team to locate and activate the Legion. They were humanity's last chance. The team descended into the depths of the forgotten facility. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were lined with the marks of time's cruel touch. The facility had long since been abandoned, left to decay after the project was deemed too dangerous, even for a world at war. It was a place of secrets, of unspoken histories, and of soldiers who had been left to rest in cold, sterile slumber. The team fought through the old facility, moving cautiously as the faint hum of power began to stir. They had come to awaken the Legion, but what they would find was a question they couldn't answer. No one knew if these soldiers would still be capable of fighting. No one knew if they would still answer the call. But there was no turning back. One by one, they activated the cryogenic chambers that held the Legionnaires. The frozen soldiers stirred, their eyes snapping open, their systems coming online. The first one to awaken was Colonel Kyle, the leader of the Legion. His body was a perfect blend of flesh and machine, his mind sharp and focused, even after years of dormancy. He had been a living legend before he was put to sleep, a warrior unmatched in combat, known for his brutal tactics and flawless execution. He stood tall, his every movement precise and deliberate as his senses sharpened, taking in the situation. He knew something was wrong, but it didn't matter. He was a soldier, and his duty had not changed. When Kyle spoke, his voice was a low growl, commanding and filled with authority. "What is the situation?" he asked, his eyes locking onto General Hayes. He was a man who had lived through the worst wars humanity had ever faced, and his instincts told him that the world was in even greater danger than before. General Hayes wasted no time in explaining. The severity of the situation, the fall of the colonies, the Tsark invasion, and the crumbling remnants of humanity's defenses. She told him that Earth's survival depended on the Legion, on him and his soldiers. Kale didn't hesitate. His eyes burned with a fiery determination, and without another word, he nodded. "We are ready." The Legionnaires had been created for this very purpose, for a war that would require every ounce of their strength, skill, and resolve. As the soldiers began to awaken fully, their memories were slowly restored, and with each one came a wave of readiness. They were not mere soldiers. They were a force of nature, a perfect blend of human will and advanced technology, designed to win wars that seemed impossible. Their leader, Colonel Kale, was a man forged for battle, a living weapon who knew the price of war, and he was prepared to pay it again. The Legion was no longer a myth. It was humanity's final hope. As the last of the Legionnaires rose, they stood ready to face the Tsark. Their task was clear: to push back the alien invasion and save what was left of humanity. But as Kale's eyes scanned the ruined world around him, he knew this would not be an easy victory. They were the last line of defense, and their journey into the heart of the enemy's forces had only just begun. There was no turning back. The Legion had awoken, and with them, the fate of Earth hung in the balance. As the vanguard joined the scattered remnants of Earth's fleet in a final, desperate stand, the sheer scale of the Tsark Armada was overwhelming. The enemy ships filled the skies, their dark forms blotting out the stars, their weapons aimed at the heart of humanity. General Hayes stood at the bridge, her eyes locked onto the approaching threat, but she was not alone in this battle anymore. The Legionnaires, humanity's last hope, had been deployed, and they were ready to face the impossible. The first clash with the Tsark forces was nothing short of catastrophic for the enemy. The Legionnaires, enhanced by their cybernetic modifications and genetic alterations, moved with a speed and precision that defied belief. Their battle tactics were flawlessly executed, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to counter every move that Tsark made. Each Legionnaire was a force of nature, their strength far beyond the limits of normal human soldiers. They cut through Tsark infantry like a knife through butter, their agility allowing them to dodge incoming fire with ease, and their combat techniques were so advanced that they appeared almost supernatural. It was as if they could read their enemy's every move before it happened. For the first time in years, the Tsark were on the defensive, caught off guard by this new, deadly force. Colonel Kale, at the forefront of the battle, was a legend in his own right. His every move was calculated, brutal, and devastating. He led his team with a cool and collected demeanor, his eyes locked on the enemy, directing his soldiers with the precision of a master tactician. He was a living embodiment of the Legion's power. Each time he engaged a Tsark warrior, it was like watching a predator in its element, swift, efficient, and terrifyingly effective. The Tsark forces quickly realized they were facing something they could not easily overcome. Despite their overwhelming success, the Legionnaires soon discovered that the Tsark were not without their own dark secrets. As the battle raged on, the Tsark revealed their trump card, an entirely new weapon, a genetically modified creature, unlike anything the Legionnaires had ever encountered, emerged from the heart of the Tsark fleet. This creature was a terrifying hybrid, designed to mimic human thought and behavior so precisely that it was nearly impossible to predict its actions. The Tsark had created a being that was capable of adapting to any human tactic in real time, making it an unholy weapon in their arsenal. The Legionnaires were quick to engage this new threat, but the creature was unlike anything they had ever fought before. Its movements were erratic, unpredictable, and alarmingly fast. It countered every strike, dodged every attack, and seemed to anticipate their every move. The Legionnaires were powerful, yes, but they were still human. And against this new creature, their skills were pushed to the limit. Colonel Kyle, realizing the dire situation, made a decision that would change the course of the battle. He knew that no one but him stood a chance against the creature. His enhancements, his experience, and his unyielding determination were the only things that could stand a chance against this monster. with a fierce determination burning in his eyes. Kale faced the creature head-on, drawing his weapons and charging with the full force of his enhanced body. The battle between Kale and the creature was nothing short of a spectacle. The two clashed in a whirlwind of speed and violence, their every strike shaking the ground beneath them. The creature was powerful, its strength was immense, and its speed nearly matched Kale's own. The two warriors moved like shadows, each trying to outthink and outmaneuver the other. The legionnaires watched in awe as their leader faced the terrifying creature, knowing that this battle would determine the fate of humanity. As the fight wore on, Kale began to show signs of wear. The creature's relentless adaptability and strength were taking their toll. But Colonel Kyle was no ordinary man. He was more than just a soldier. His mind raced, calculating every move, every weakness in the creature's defenses. And then, in a split second of brilliance, he found it. With one swift motion, he exploited the creature's momentary lapse in judgment, delivering a decisive blow that sent the monster crashing to the ground. But even as Kale stood victorious, bloodied and exhausted, he knew this battle was far from over. The Tsark were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to win. The legionnaires had won their first victory, but the war was far from over. The fate of Earth still hung in the balance. Colonel Kyle, his heart pounding in his chest, looked to the horizon. The legionnaires were not done yet. They would fight until the very end, and they would show the Tsark that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The battle for survival had only just begun. The war raged on, but with each passing day, the unity among the legionnaires began to fracture. Their once unshakable bond, forged in the heat of battle, now showed signs of weakening. The legionnaires had been designed to be the perfect soldiers, enhanced, brutal, efficient. But as they faced the endless onslaught of the Tsark, doubts began to creep in. The weight of their actions, the blood they had shed, and the lives they had taken began to gnaw at their minds. They had been created as weapons, but now, in the heat of battle, some of them began to question the very purpose of their existence. Colonel Kale, the stoic leader of the Legion, had always been a man of few words. He led by example, his strength and focus inspiring his soldiers. But even he was beginning to feel the strain. Every time he ordered a strike, every time he watched another Tsark soldier fall, he couldn't escape the haunting thought that perhaps they were becoming as merciless as the enemy they fought. Was humanity's last hope really a force of destruction? Or were they just another tool in the hands of war, destined to bring about the very destruction they sought to prevent? Kale kept these thoughts to himself, but they weighed heavily on him. His every decision was now haunted by the knowledge that the legionnaires might be the very thing that would ultimately lead to humanity's downfall. The cracks within the legionnaires began to widen as some of them voiced their doubts. The constant battle, the unrelenting pressure, and the difficult choices they were forced to make had left them questioning everything. One by one, they came to Kyle, their faces showing the burden they carried. "Are we doing the right thing?" one of them asked. "Are we any different from the Tsark?" The question hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all. Kale could feel the weight of their uncertainty, but he had no answers. He had been trained to fight, to lead, but now, more than ever, he felt the weight of his creation. The Legion was humanity's last hope, but at what cost? But the internal struggles of the legionnaires were not the only threat to humanity's survival. Far from the front lines, within the command center of the Terran fleet, a darker betrayal was unfolding. Admiral Sarah Huxley, a highly respected officer in the fleet, had long been seen as a fierce and unwavering leader. But beneath her cold exterior, a different story was unfolding. She had been in contact with the Tsark, secretly, away from the prying eyes of her fellow officers, and she had come to a shocking conclusion. In her mind, humanity's war against the Tsark was hopeless. The human race was outmatched, outgunned, and on the verge of complete destruction. She had come to believe that the only way to save humanity was to align with the Tsark, to offer them Earth's surrender in exchange for survival. It was a cold, calculated decision, one that Huxley knew would send shockwaves through the entire fleet. But she believed it was the only way. The Tsark offered a future where humanity would be spared, where Earth would survive, but at a terrible price. She began to secretly work with the Tsark, passing along critical information about the Terran fleet's movements and defenses, ensuring that their forces would be in the best position to strike. But the true weight of her betrayal was not just in the alliance with the enemy. It was in the division it caused among the human forces. As news of Huxley's betrayal began to spread, distrust and paranoia rippled through the ranks of the Terran fleet. The Legionnaires, already uncertain about their role in the war, now found themselves questioning the very people they had been fighting to protect. If one of their own commanders could betray them, who else could be working against them? The lines between friend and foe blurred, and with every passing moment, the fragile unity of the human forces began to unravel. Kale and his soldiers found themselves facing not just an external enemy, but an internal one as well. How could they trust their own allies when they were fighting on so many fronts? As the Legionnaires prepared for their next engagement with the Tsark, they could not shake the nagging fear that something far darker was at play. They had been created for this fight, but now, as the war took an even more treacherous turn, they realized that the true battle was not just for Earth's survival, it was for the very soul of humanity. Colonel Kale knew that the war had entered a new phase, one that would test not just their strength and tactics, but their very loyalty. As the Tsark closed in and the shadows of betrayal deepened, Kale made a vow to himself. He would not let the Legion fall apart. No matter what, they would fight to the end, together. But in this new war, with trust shattered and betrayals looming, Kale knew that nothing was certain. The Legion had been humanity's last hope, but now it seemed the greatest enemy was not the Tsark. It was the darkness that lurked within their own ranks. The revelation of Admiral Sarah Huxley's betrayal shattered the fragile unity that had held humanity's defenses together. Her alignment with the Tsark, though carefully hidden, was now exposed for all to see, and the consequences were immediate and devastating. The human forces, once galvanized by a shared sense of purpose, were now divided by suspicion and distrust. Morale plummeted, and the once cohesive ranks of Earth's military seemed to disintegrate before their eyes. Without trust, without the strength of unity, the last lines of defense against the Tsark were beginning to falter. In the midst of this chaos, the Tsark wasted no time in exploiting the fracture in humanity's resolve. They launched an all-out assault on Earth's final stronghold, an ancient, heavily fortified city that had long been thought to be humanity's last hope. The Tsark fleet descended upon the planet like a swarm of locusts, overwhelming every last defense with their sheer numbers and terrifying technology. The walls that had once stood as symbols of humanity's resilience now crumbled under the weight of the Tsark's assault. The human forces, already on the brink of collapse, were now facing their final reckoning. Colonel Kyle, his face grim but resolute, stood with the Legionnaires at the front lines. Despite the fractured command structure and the growing sense of despair, he refused to let his soldiers lose hope. They had been created for this very moment, and they would not let it slip away. The Legionnaires fought with renewed intensity, each movement fluid and precise as they engaged the Tsark forces. Their enhanced strength, speed, and tactical genius gave them an edge in the battle, but even they could not deny the truth. No matter how advanced their tactics, the Tsark's numbers and cunning were beginning to overwhelm them. The battle was slipping out of their control, and Kale could feel it in his bones. But just as all seemed lost, a spark of hope emerged from the unlikeliest of places. Amidst the chaos, a forgotten project was activated, the Terran Initiative. The Terran Initiative had been a top-secret project designed to harness humanity's greatest strength, its unrelenting adaptability and boundless creativity. Unlike The Legion, who were enhanced to be perfect soldiers, the Terran Initiative was a weapon that relied on the ingenuity of human minds. The project, though still in its early stages, had the potential to turn the tide of the war. It was not a weapon designed to face the Tsark head-on in a battle of strength, but one that could outsmart them, one that could predict, adapt, and counter the Tsark's strategies in ways the aliens could not anticipate. For the Legionnaires, the arrival of this new weapon was a revelation. They were soldiers, yes, but they had always been trained to fight using the same tactics, the same strategies that had been passed down to them. The Terran Initiative, however, was something entirely different. It was a reflection of humanity's core strength, the ability to think outside the box, to surprise even the most cunning enemies. Colonel Kale understood the importance of this new weapon immediately. While the Legionnaires continued to hold the line, they would need to work alongside the Terran Initiative to bring humanity's last line of defense into a new reality. The battle was no longer just about strength. It was about intelligence, creativity, and the ability to adapt. The Legionnaires were hesitant at first, unsure of how they could work alongside such an untested force. But Kale knew that this was their only chance. The Terran Initiative was humanity's response to the Tsark's overwhelming power, and if it could be integrated with the Legion's combat prowess, perhaps they could still turn the tide. The battlefield had become a place of constant evolution, and Kale and his soldiers had to evolve with it. They would need to blend the raw power of the Legion with the unpredictable genius of the Terran Initiative if they were to stand a chance against the Tsark's onslaught. In the heat of battle, the first collaboration between the Legionnaires and the Terran Initiative began. The soldiers fought with new strategies, innovative, unpredictable, and disorienting to the Tsark. The Legionnaires used their advanced combat skills to hold the enemy back, while the minds behind the Terran Initiative devised tactics that left the Tsark scrambling. The Tsark had long relied on their overwhelming strength and numbers to win battles. But now, for the first time, they were facing an enemy they could not simply overpower. As the battle raged on, the Legionnaires realized that this new weapon, this fusion of human ingenuity and enhanced power, was their best hope. They would fight, not just with strength, but with cunning, with creativity, and with the relentless will to survive. The Tsark might have their numbers, but humanity had something far more dangerous: adaptability. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, there was a glimmer of hope that they might just win. The Legion had been humanity's last line of defense, but now, with the Terran Initiative by their side, they had a fighting chance. The reckoning had come, but it was not the end. It was the beginning of a new fight, one that would test humanity's greatest strength, its ability to adapt and survive. With Earth's final defense line crumbling under the relentless assault of the Tsark, the human resistance had to turn to desperate measures. The Legionnaires, the last hope of humanity, were no longer fighting alone. In an unprecedented move, they were paired with ordinary humans, soldiers, engineers, and civilians, individuals who had somehow survived against all odds. These were people who had witnessed the fall of humanity's greatest cities, who had lost loved ones and witnessed countless horrors, yet still carried on, finding the strength to fight. Together, this unlikely team of warriors, thinkers, and survivors formed a daring, almost reckless plan: infiltrate the heart of the Tsark Empire and strike at the core of their power, the Tsark flagship, Oblivion. The goal was clear, yet almost impossible. If they could infiltrate Oblivion and destroy the Tsark command structure from within, it would cripple the enemy's ability to continue the war. The plan was a high-stakes gamble, a final push to end the war. But no one believed they had much time left. The Tsark were relentless, and their superiority in numbers and technology made them a daunting adversary. But the humans had one weapon that the Tsark couldn't predict: their unyielding spirit. The Legionnaires and these ordinary humans would need to work together, combining their strengths to overcome impossible odds. As they made their way toward oblivion, the team knew that the mission was a one-way journey for many of them. The Tsark flagship was a fortress, massive, heavily guarded, and filled with alien technology that even the Legionnaires found difficult to comprehend. The labyrinthine corridors were lined with traps and strange, shifting alien technology, making every step forward a gamble. But the team pressed on, led by Colonel Kale, whose calm and methodical leadership kept them grounded despite the uncertainty. It was not the physical challenges that tested them most, but the unseen psychological warfare that the Tsark unleashed. The ship itself seemed alive, an ever-shifting maze designed to unnerve and confuse any intruders. It was a place where the very air seemed to hum with a sinister energy, playing tricks on the mind. The Legionnaires, creatures of brute strength and deadly precision, were accustomed to fighting. They were designed for combat, and they fought as a well-oiled machine, each member anticipating the other's moves, flowing together in a seamless rhythm. But in oblivion, they were faced with something entirely different. The Tsark used psychological traps, illusions, and strange alien technology to break their will, testing not just their physical strength but their very resolve. As the team moved deeper into the bowels of oblivion, they encountered the true strength of the human spirit. The ordinary soldiers, engineers, and civilians, people who had no enhancements, no cybernetic implants, showed a resilience the Legionnaires had not expected. The engineers devised ways to bypass the alien security systems. The soldiers displayed unmatched courage as they held the line when the Legionnaires were overwhelmed, and even the civilians, many of them without formal training, found ways to adapt, using their resourcefulness to overcome the Tsark's traps. It was a humbling experience for the Legionnaires, who had long believed that their advanced abilities were the key to victory. They were powerful, yes, but they had never faced a challenge like this, where raw human ingenuity and perseverance played such a critical role. For Colonel Kale, the most eye-opening part of the mission was watching the human determination unfold before him. While the Legionnaires could fight with unmatched precision, it was the will of these ordinary humans that pushed them through the most difficult parts of their journey. The soldiers fought not for glory, but for survival and the hope of a future. The engineers, whose hands shook as they worked with alien technology, still found a way to fix the broken equipment, refusing to let their fear or doubts stop them. Even the civilians, who had never trained for war, picked up weapons, ready to fight with every ounce of courage they could muster. In those moments, Kale realized that it wasn't just the Legionnaires who were humanity's greatest asset. It was the human spark, the determination that refused to die even in the face of overwhelming odds. As they neared the core of the oblivion, the stakes became clearer. Their mission was no longer just about destroying the Tsark. It was about showing the Tsark and themselves that humanity would not be crushed. The Legionnaires had always been weapons of war, but now they understood what it truly meant to fight. The human will to survive, to adapt, to push forward when all seemed lost, was their greatest weapon. As the team approached the heart of the oblivion, they knew that this would be their final test. They would either succeed or be wiped out entirely. But as they stood side by side, the Legionnaires and these ordinary humans knew one thing for sure. Together, they had ignited a spark that could not be extinguished. It was the human spirit, unbroken and unyielding, that would carry them forward. The final battle aboard the Oblivion was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the odds seemed insurmountable. The Sci-Fi Legionnaires, once dormant and hidden beneath the Earth's surface, had emerged as humanity's greatest weapon. Now, alongside the last remaining soldiers, engineers, and civilians who had fought tirelessly to survive, they were preparing for a coordinated assault against the heart of the Tsark Empire. The plan was simple in theory. Infiltrate the Tsark, flagship, take down its command structure, and cripple their war effort once and for all. But as they approached the core of the Oblivion, it became clear that there would be no easy victory. The Legionnaires fought with unparalleled precision, their enhanced abilities making them a force to be reckoned with. Yet, they were not fighting alone. Humanity's ingenuity, born from centuries of struggle and resilience, was at the forefront of the battle. Ordinary men and women, soldiers with no enhancements, engineers with no weapons beyond their knowledge, civilians who had never dreamed of battle, stood shoulder to shoulder with the Legionnaires, using every ounce of their strength, creativity, and determination to push back the Tsark forces. Together, they attacked in waves, bypassing alien defenses, exploiting every flaw, every vulnerability they could find in the Tsark's seemingly impenetrable technology. The battle was brutal, chaotic, and unrelenting, but it was clear that humanity, once on the brink of annihilation, was fighting back with everything it had. In the midst of this madness, Colonel Kyle faced his greatest challenge. The Tsark Supreme Commander, a towering figure, an alien being as ruthless as it was intelligent, stood in his way. Their confrontation was inevitable. As Kale stepped into the heart of the oblivion, the battle around him seemed to fade into the background. The two leaders clashed in a brutal one-on-one combat that echoed the very essence of the war, humanity's last stand against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Kyle, with his enhanced strength and tactical brilliance, fought with everything he had, but the Supreme Commander was a creature of calculated strategy, using every advantage that Tsark's superior technology afforded him. Each strike, each maneuver, was a battle for survival, not just for Kale, but for all of humanity. The outcome of this fight would decide the fate of Earth. Outside the command center, the battle continued to rage. The Legionnaires and the remaining human forces pushed deeper into the oblivion, systematically dismantling the Tsark's defenses. It was a battle of attrition. Each step forward came with a price. Many Legionnaires fell in the heat of combat, their once indestructible forms now casualties of a war that had taken everything from them. Yet they fought on, for they knew that this was humanity's final chance. As the Tsark's once mighty warships began to falter, the tide of the battle slowly began to shift. Back in the heart of the oblivion, the duel between Colonel Kyle and the Tsark Supreme Commander reached its climax. With a final, desperate move, Kale struck, breaking through the aliens' defenses. The commander fell, and with his defeat, the Tsark's command structure crumbled. The oblivion itself began to shake, its systems failing one by one. The once immense Tsark fleet, without its leader, began to retreat, its forces disbanding in confusion and fear. It was a moment of triumph that few had dared to hope for, a victory against an enemy that had seemed invincible. But victory came, at a great cost. Earth was left in ruins, cities reduced to ashes, landscapes scarred by years of war. The Legionnaires, who had been created as tools of war, were now the last of their kind. Many had fallen in the battle, their sacrifices ensuring that humanity would survive. The remaining Legionnaires, once seen as little more than machines, were hailed as heroes, not just for their physical prowess, but for the indomitable will they had shown throughout the war. They had been born from desperation, but they had become symbols of humanity's strength, resilience, and unbreakable spirit. As the Tsark retreated into the depths of space, humanity began to rebuild. It would not be easy, and the scars of the war would take generations to heal. But the lessons learned during the war, of courage, unity, and the power of human determination, would shape the future. The surviving Legionnaires stood not as weapons of destruction, but as the embodiment of humanity's refusal to surrender. They had fought alongside the human spirit itself, and together they had achieved the impossible. In the end, Earth's most dangerous soldiers, once feared, once thought to be mere instruments of war, had become the true heroes of humanity's future. Their legacy would live on as a reminder that, even in the darkest times, the human spark, the drive to survive, to adapt, to overcome, was unstoppable. And with that spark, humanity would rise once more, stronger than ever before.